Hey there, good morning and welcome to the JeepSolid garage. So today we're continuing on with the stroker build. This is a inline 6 4-liter engine that we're turning into a stroker 4.6. This should be episode number 8, I believe. If you're following along, awesome. Be sure to subscribe so you can see how the stroker build turns out. Today we're installing pistons. We've got the piston rings all on there. The rods are in place. Today we're going to go through the process of putting them in, plastigauge, checking our clearance on it. Should be a fun day. In the last episode, we installed our crank, got it all lubed up. All the clearances on it are just perfect. We've got our pistons and rods all assembled. In a previous video, we put the piston rings on. These are 30 thousandths over pistons, and the rods, these are out of a 4.2. This is the short rod setup. And of course, we've got some assembly lube, a piston compression tool, definitely gonna need one of those, and our bearings for the rods. We're gonna go through how to plastigauge those and everything you need to do. This video is sponsored by Engine Tech. I've used their parts on other builds. I did this 4.0 rebuild here using all Engine Tech parts and on a few other things. I've been super happy with their product, no issues at all. Be sure to check out their website, linked in the description below. I've found it's easiest to turn this sideways because we gotta get to the top and bottom to install our pistons here. And of course, we've already started assembly. As you guys can see, I had this covered with plastic, trying to keep it as clean as possible. But before we install the pistons, I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of a WD-40. I got a lint-free rag here. We're gonna make sure that our cylinders are all perfectly clean here. If you do this with a lint-free rag, a little WD-40, you'll notice that when you pull your rag out, it can still have a little bit of dirt on it. We want to make sure it's perfectly clean. We're going to wipe it until we don't get any more dirt out. Now, because these are brand new pistons and rods, the order of them doesn't really matter as far as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you're reusing parts though, you do need to keep them in the same order, cylinder 1, cylinder 4, all that. A few things though, on the bearing caps, on the rod caps here, sorry, the rod caps, they are stamped. You can see here, there's a 0 there and a 0 there. And on the other side, there is nothing. So the caps are directional. You need to keep them in the same order there. And also on the bearing, on the piston themselves, you'll notice there's an arrow right there. We need to make sure that that arrow faces the front of the engine. So a few things to pay attention to there. Got our ring compressor ready here. We'll take the bolts off the cap, the rod end here, and then we're going to clean. Yeah, these are always kind of stuck. There we go, we got it. Had to kind of hold it up and tap on the end of the threads there to open it up. But now we're gonna just clean. We want the bearing surface here clean and dry. We're not gonna want any lube or any oils on this part of where the bearing is gonna seat. And now we can place a couple of our Engine Tech bearings. And yeah, I've used Engine Tech for honestly a number of years now. And I have to say, I've been really happy with their product. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't believe in their product. And their customer service, I've always had good, if I need to call them for some reason, they've always been very helpful as well. So super happy with that. So here we're just pushing a bearing in place. There's a little tab right there that it fits into, only goes in one direction. And these are different than the bearings on the crank that have an oiling hole. These do not have that oiling hole, just that tab you gotta line up there. And yeah, they're going in dry. Okay, now we're ready to place the piston. Here I've got a couple pieces of rubber tubing. I'm gonna put these over the threads here because we wanna protect our cylinder walls when we're feeding this in, and also we don't want to damage the journal on our crank, as you'll see here in a second. But we are gonna take some lube here. Now we're gonna lube these guys up. This is the fun, gooey part. Whew, a little too much there. Don't need quite that much. Okay, we are ready for piston installation. But we want to make sure that this journal here is down at the bottom. So that would be bottom dead center, cylinder number 1. And I can easily rotate it by hand right now. As we get the other pistons installed, it's going to get harder and harder to turn by hand as the resistance of the pistons with the piston rings scraping on the cylinders just makes it a little bit harder. So as you get down to these last pistons, you might have to put your crank bolt in place and turn it with a wrench. But right now, easily turns with hand, so our journal's at the bottom, we can feed the piston in. We're gonna make sure that our piston rings are on opposite ends, the ring gap. So we got one there, we got one there. They're on opposite ends, so that's all good. Get our compressor on there. A little bit of our piston skirt sticking out the bottom. Make sure it's lined up. There's other piston ring compressors out there. This one works okay. It's not the best, but gets the job done. See how it's off-centered there a little bit? You square it up. That's the thing, is you just gotta make sure everything is square as you're going along. Okay, that should be good. So now we're gonna make sure our arrow is faced towards the front of the engine. We can slide this in, and usually I like to catch it on the back side. Let me switch. I'm gonna feed this in, not scraping up our cylinder walls. And I'll try to kind of catch the back end here. And once it's in there pretty flush, I'll kind of hold up the rod on the back side. I'm kind of pulling in on the rod a little bit, and we'll tap it in place. And as you're tapping, if it stops moving, if you run into a firm resistance like because the piston ring, if you don't have it clamped down quite enough or you got to reseat it, the piston ring will try to catch on the edge of the block here. So don't force it, stop what you're doing, back it out, reseat it, and then continue. Because you can break piston rings doing this, and you don't want to do that. Kind of slipped off there. I can see a ring there, so we're going to reseat this. Yeah, definitely not my favorite piston ring compressor, but honestly for the price, and you know, if you're not doing this job very often, it'll get the job done. Just holding up the rod on the back end here. Finish tapping it down. And now I'm going to seat it down all the way. Now we can check our clearance. I've got my plastigauge here, green plastigauge. This goes from what, 1,000 to 3 thousandths. If you haven't seen my videos on the use of plastigauge or how to use it, I recommend going and checking that out. I think I actually covered it fairly well in my last video on doing installing the crank. We'll kind of go over it again here. We'll see if we can get this little bit of plastigauge to stick right there. Get our cap on here with the zeros lined up. And we'll put these on. Then we're going to actually torque this down. And we're doing it all dry right now. We don't have any lube on this bearing. So we don't want to be moving the crank around right now. Moving the journal inside of this bearing. We want to keep it dry. We're going to torque this down to 33 foot-pounds. But we're going to do that in a few different steps. We're going to go like 20 and then about 26 and then actually up to 33, sorry. 20, 28, and then 33. Okay, now we can take this bearing cap back off and check our clearance. Make sure our bearing stays in our cap here. And now my clearance is supposed to be 1 to 3 thousandths, kind of in that range. And it looks like here we are at 2 thousandths. So that's just perfect. I gotta clean off the old plastigauge here. And a cool little trick, which I showed in one of my last video on doing the crank. A little bit of WD-40, kind of scrapes right off. It's a good tip. Let's get our little thread protectors back on here, although these aren't to protect the threads, it's to protect the journal, because we got to push this piston back out. Got myself a nice clean long dowel here, and we're going to tap this out, or not all the way out, just enough to get some lube. Now we'll get a little lube on the bearings here and on the journal of the crank where the rods are attaching. Make sure our cap is going on the right direction, and torque this back down to 33 foot-pounds. In that three-step process, we'll go, what, 20, 27, 33. All right, very cool. Let's double check that the piston is in the right direction. Arrows pointed forward. So there we go, piston number 1 is done, woohoo! We gotta repeat the same process for the other 5 pistons. It's a 6-cylinder, gonna be a 4.6 liter stroker. This is gonna be so cool. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have a tip or trick on installing pistons that I didn't cover, leave it in the comments down below. Love hearing from you guys. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.